The lunch money question. The studio lights blazed with that familiar golden warmth that had made Family Feud a household name for generations. Tuesday evening tapings always carried a different energy than the afternoon sessions. The audience was livelier after dinner. Families had been waiting all day for their moment, and Steve Harvey seemed to feed off that anticipation like fuel for his comedic fire. The iconic blue and orange set gleamed under the professional lighting, every surface polished to television perfection, every angle calculated to create the most engaging visual experience for the millions of viewers who would tune in. But tonight, something felt different from the moment the first family walked onto the stage. The Williams family had driven 18 hours straight from Detroit in a borrowed minivan with a temperamental air conditioner and seats that had seen better decades. They were a study in determined hope, 5 people who had pooled their last dollars for gas money and a cheap motel room, because this game show represented more than entertainment. For them, it was a lifeline thrown into waters that had been rising for far too long. At the center of their lineup stood 16-year-old Marcus Williams, tall for his age but carrying himself with the careful posture of someone who had learned too early that the world was watching, judging, waiting for him to stumble. He wore his best button-down shirt, white cotton that his mother had pressed 3 times that morning, checking and rechecking for wrinkles that might embarrass them on national television. His jeans were his only pair without holes, and his sneakers had been scrubbed clean with an old toothbrush until they looked almost new. Marcus shouldn't have been there at all. Family Feud contestants were supposed to be adults, family representatives chosen for their quick wit and television presence. But life had a way of disrupting even the most carefully laid plans. 3 days before the taping, Marcus's mother, Angela Williams, had collapsed during her shift at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse's aide. The diabetes that she'd been managing for years had taken a sudden turn, sending her blood sugar levels into dangerous territory and landing her in the ICU of the very hospital where she'd been emptying trash bins and mopping floors just hours earlier. The phone call to the Family Feud producers had been one of the hardest Marcus had ever made. His grandmother Dorothy, the family matriarch who had originally been selected to represent their family, was too distraught to speak. His aunt Patricia was juggling 3 jobs and couldn't take time off without risking termination. His cousin Janae was 8 months pregnant and on bed rest. That left Marcus. "Please," he had said to the producer on the other end of the line, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to sound older than his 16 years. "My mom is in the hospital and we can't afford to lose this chance. The prize money, we need it for her medical bills. I can answer questions. I know how to play the game. Please don't give our spot to another family." The producer had hesitated. There were rules, protocols, legal considerations about minors on television. But something in Marcus's voice, that combination of desperation and determination that spoke to anyone who had ever watched a family struggle against impossible odds, had moved her to make an exception. Now, standing under those blazing studio lights with cameras capturing his every expression, Marcus felt the weight of his family's hopes pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. His grandmother stood beside him, her arthritis-gnarled hands gripping his arm for support that was both physical and emotional. His Aunt Patricia kept checking her phone for updates from the hospital. His cousin Janae had insisted on coming despite her doctor's orders, her pregnant belly straining against the only dress she owned that still fit. Across the stage stood the Chen family from Sacramento, a multi-generational unit that radiated the kind of comfortable middle-class stability that Marcus could barely imagine. Their clothes fit properly, their smiles came easily, and they carried themselves with the confidence of people who had never had to choose between paying for medicine or keeping the lights on. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. The Chen family represented the American dream achieved. The Williams family represented the American struggle, ongoing. But that's what made good television. The collision of different worlds, different perspectives, different definitions of what constituted victory. Steve Harvey worked the room with his signature blend of humor and warmth, his burgundy suit immaculate, his energy infectious. He'd been doing this long enough to read the dynamics between families, to sense when there was more riding on the outcome than just prize money and bragging rights. Something about the Williams family's nervous intensity, the way they looked at each other with a mixture of hope and fear, told him that this wasn't just another game for them. The early rounds had gone well enough. The Williams family played conservatively, sticking to obvious answers that they knew would appear on the board. They weren't there to be clever or memorable. They were there to accumulate points, to build toward a fast money round that could change everything for them. The Chen family played with more flair, taking risks that sometimes paid off spectacularly and sometimes left them empty-handed. By the fourth round, the score was closer than anyone had expected. Williams family, 56, Chen family, 142. Close enough that either family could surge ahead with a strong showing. Close enough that Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he was certain the microphones would pick it up. Steve walked to the center of the stage, that moment of theatrical pause that he had perfected over years of hosting. The studio audience leaned forward collectively, sensing that the game was reaching its crucial phase. In the control room, producers whispered into their headsets, adjusting camera angles to capture every nuance of what was about to unfold. "All right, folks," Steve announced, his voice carrying that perfect blend of authority and anticipation that had made him America's favorite game show host. "We've got ourselves a real battle here tonight. The Williams family from Detroit, showing us what Motor City determination looks like. The Chen family from Sacramento, proving that the West Coast knows how to play this game." But this next question, he paused for dramatic effect. This next question could change everything. Marcus stepped forward for the face-off, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. He'd watched Family Feud religiously since childhood, studied the rhythms and patterns of the game, memorized the kinds of answers that typically appeared on survey boards. But standing there under those lights, with his family's financial survival hanging in the balance, all of that preparation felt inadequate. Steve noticed Marcus's nervousness immediately. In his years of hosting, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read contestants, to sense the difference between normal game show anxiety and something deeper. What he saw in Marcus's face wasn't just competitive pressure. This was the look of someone carrying weight that no 16-year-old should have to bear. "Marcus," Steve said gently, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "You feeling all right, young man? You look a little nervous there." Marcus tried to smile, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm good, Mr. Steve. This means a lot to my family." Steve studied the teenager's face for a moment longer. There was something in Marcus's expression that reminded him of his own children when they were working through problems too complex for their age. It was the look of someone trying to be stronger than they felt, older than they were, more capable than their circumstances allowed. "Well, don't you worry about being nervous," Steve said, with that warm paternal tone that had comforted thousands of contestants over the years. "Nervous means you care, and caring isn't nothing to be ashamed of." He smiled encouragingly. "Now let's see what you're made of." Steve lifted the question card with theatrical flair. The same gesture he'd made thousands of times but somehow made feel fresh every single time. "We surveyed 100 people, top 7 answers on the board." He paused, building the tension. "Name something kids save their allowance for." The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. It should have been straightforward, the kind of light-hearted survey that generated predictable responses about video games, candy, toys, or clothes. The kind of question designed to make families laugh and audiences smile. Steve expected quick buzzer work, competitive energy, maybe a funny story about childhood spending habits. Instead, Marcus stood frozen at the podium. Not the strategic freeze of someone calculating the best possible answer, but the complete stillness of someone who had just been hit by something unexpected and overwhelming. His hand hovered over the buzzer, trembling slightly. But he didn't press it. 5 seconds passed, then 10, The Chen family exchanged glances, ready to steal if Marcus ran out of time. Steve's eyebrows raised slightly, that signature expression of gentle curiosity that had become one of his trademarks. "Marcus, you thinking hard about this one?" Marcus looked up at Steve, and for just a moment, his careful composure cracked. Steve saw something in the teenager's eyes that made his own chest tighten. Pain that was too adult, too complicated, too heavy for someone who should have been worried about homework and basketball tryouts. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. But in the studio's perfect acoustics, every word carried clearly through the microphones and into the hearts of everyone listening. "Medicine for my mom." The studio fell silent so completely that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. The answer hung in the air like a revelation, stripping away every pretense, every assumption about what this moment was supposed to be about. This wasn't a game show anymore. This was a 16-year-old boy carrying the weight of his family's survival. The audience didn't gasp or murmur. They simply stopped breathing. Camera operators found themselves pausing behind their equipment, suddenly aware that they were capturing something far more significant than entertainment. Even the scoreboard, with its bright digital display ready to reveal survey answers, seemed suddenly irrelevant in the face of such raw honesty. Steve Harvey blinked slowly, his mind processing what he had just heard. In over a decade of hosting Family Feud, through thousands of questions and tens of thousands of answers, he had never encountered anything like this. Not because the answer was inappropriate or wrong, but because it came from a place of truth so fundamental and heartbreaking that it transcended the comfortable boundaries of television. "Say that again for me, son," Steve asked, his voice automatically dropping to the gentle tone he used with his own children when they needed to share something difficult. Marcus lifted his chin slightly, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside himself. "Medicine for my mom," he repeated, louder this time. "That's what I save money for. That's what we all save money for." The Chen family had stopped thinking about their competitive strategy entirely. The studio audience had gone from anticipatory to riveted. Even the production crew, usually focused solely on the technical aspects of creating television, found themselves emotionally invested in this moment of unexpected honesty. Steve set his question cards down on the nearest podium, with deliberate care. The small action sent a clear signal to everyone in the studio. This wasn't about the game anymore. This had become something much more important. "Marcus," Steve said softly, taking a step closer to the teenager's podium. "Can you tell me what you mean by that?" The question was an invitation, a gentle opening of a door that Marcus had been carrying the key to for far too long. He looked at Steve, really looked at him, and seemed to see past the television persona to the father. The man who understood what it meant to love someone enough to sacrifice everything for their well-being. "My mama has diabetes," Marcus began, his voice gaining strength even as tears gathered in his eyes. "Type 2, but it's been getting worse. Her insulin costs $300 a month. And that's with the insurance from her job. But the insurance doesn't cover everything. Doesn't cover the test strips, the doctor visits when her levels spike, the special food she needs to eat." Steve felt that familiar tightness in his chest that came when someone's story connected with his own experiences of struggle and family loyalty. He'd interviewed thousands of people over his decades in entertainment, but there was something about Marcus's quiet dignity, his refusal to ask for pity, that cut straight through every professional defense. "So I work," Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely down his face. "After school, weekends, whenever I can, I deliver groceries for Mr. Peterson down the street. I walk dogs for the lady in apartment 3B. I tutor kids in math because I'm good at it. And every dollar I make, every penny I find in couch cushions, I put in a jar on my dresser, for Mama's medicine." The studio had become a cathedral of attention. 300 people sat in absolute silence, witnessing something they instinctively understood was sacred. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone behind them seemed to have forgotten they were making television. "How much do you make?" Steve asked gently, though something in his expression suggested he was almost afraid to hear the answer. "Maybe $40–50 a week if I'm lucky," Marcus said. "It's not enough. It's never enough. But Mama, she tells me not to worry about it. Says she'll figure something out. But I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I hear her on the phone with the pharmacy, begging them to let her pay half now and half next week." Marcus's grandmother, Dorothy, who had been standing silently beside him, finally broke. Her quiet sobs provided a heartbreaking soundtrack to her grandson's words. Behind them, Aunt Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked through. "Last month," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, "Mama had to choose between buying her insulin and paying the electric bill. She bought the insulin, and we sat in the dark for 3 days, until I could scrape together enough money from my jar to get the lights turned back on." Steve took another step closer, his movement instinctive, the response of someone who recognized that this moment required proximity, not distance. He wasn't a game show host anymore. He was simply a human being trying to bridge the space between one person's pain and another's understanding. "That's why we're here," Marcus said, looking directly at Steve with an intensity that seemed to tease straight into his soul. "Not for the fun of being on TV, not to be famous. The prize money, if we win, it could buy Mama's medicine for months, maybe even a whole year, and maybe she wouldn't have to choose anymore." The silence that followed wasn't the awkward quiet that sometimes fell over television studios when things went off script. This was the reverential silence of people recognizing that they were witnessing something profound, something that touched the fundamental human experiences of love, sacrifice, and the lengths to which we'll go for family. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, who had navigated thousands of unexpected moments with grace and humor, found himself in completely uncharted territory. But what happened next would define not just this episode, but his entire understanding of what it meant to use his platform for something greater than entertainment. He didn't think about the cameras, the producers frantically whispering in the control room, or the millions of viewers who would eventually watch this moment. He thought only about Marcus, standing there in his courage and vulnerability, sharing the weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. Steve Harvey did something unprecedented in the history of Family Feud. He walked away from his host position entirely, stepped around the podium, and pulled Marcus into the kind of hug that fathers give sons when words aren't enough to bridge the distance between pain and comfort. The audience rose to their feet, not because they were prompted by cue cards or directed by floor managers, but because they couldn't remain seated in the face of such raw, honest human connection. The applause that followed wasn't the manufactured enthusiasm of television entertainment. It was the sound of 300 people recognizing something authentic and beautiful happening in front of their eyes. Steve held Marcus for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. When he finally stepped back, he kept one hand on the teenager's shoulder, anchoring him in that moment of overwhelming emotion. "Marcus," Steve said, his voice thick with feeling, "I need you to understand something, and I need everyone in this studio, and everyone watching at home to hear this too." The studio fell silent again, waiting. "What you just told us isn't about a game show question," Steve said, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "What you just showed us is what real strength looks like. You're 16 years old, and you're carrying responsibilities that would break most grown men. But you're not just carrying them, you're carrying them with grace, with dignity, with love." Steve turned slightly to address the entire studio, his voice rising just enough to ensure everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this young man just gave us a masterclass in what family means, what sacrifice means, what love looks like when it's put into action every single day." The applause came again, deeper this time, sustained, but Steve held up a gentle hand, indicating he wasn't finished. "Marcus," he continued, looking directly at the teenager again, "I want you to know that you're not carrying this alone anymore. Do you hear me? You are not alone. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. Not a prop, not something prepared for television, but the actual card he carried with his private contact information. This has my personal number on it, he told Marcus, placing the card firmly in the teenager's hands. Not my manager's, not my assistant's, mine, and here's what I want you to do with it. Marcus looked down at the card through his tears, then back up at Steve. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call that number, and we're going to figure out how to make sure your mama gets the medicine she needs, without you having to choose between being a kid and being a caretaker. That's not your job, son. Your job is to be 16 years old, to worry about homework and girls and whether you made the basketball team. The emotion in the studio was overwhelming now. Even the Chen family had completely forgotten they were in a competition. The patriarch of their family, Dr. Chen, called across the stage, "Steve, we're doctors. We want to help too." What followed was unprecedented in game show history. Both families spontaneously left their podiums and gathered around Marcus and his family, creating a circle of support that encompassed everyone on stage. Medical professionals in the audience stood up and offered their services. Pharmaceutical representatives who happened to be present began discussing supply programs and assistance initiatives. Steve reached into his jacket again and pulled out his phone. "Marcus, I want you to see something," he said, opening his contacts. "I'm putting your grandmother's phone number in my personal phone right now. And I'm giving you mine. Because family doesn't end with blood, son. Sometimes family is whoever shows up when you need them most." The teenager was openly crying now, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of stress or fear. They were tears of relief, of hope, of the overwhelming emotion that comes when you realize you're not fighting alone anymore. But Steve wasn't finished. In a gesture that would become legendary in the Family Feud community, he began removing his burgundy suit jacket, the same jacket he'd worn for hundreds of episodes. His signature piece that had become as much a part of the show as the questions themselves. "Marcus," Steve said, draping the jacket over the teenager's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me through every kind of show, every kind of family, every kind of story, but it's never been worn by someone who embodies what family really means more than you do." The jacket was too large for Marcus's teenage frame, but he wore it like armor, like a diploma, like the physical manifestation of recognition and respect from someone who understood what it meant to rise above circumstances that tried to define you. The cameras captured every moment in perfect detail. The golden lights reflecting off tears, the burgundy of the jacket gagged Marcus's white shirt, the circle of people surrounding him and his family with their support and love. It was television, but it was also something much more important than television. When the show finally resumed, it was transformed. The game continued, but now both families were playing for the Williams family. Every correct answer was celebrated by everyone on stage. When the Chen daughter got one right, she pointed directly at Marcus. When Marcus himself successfully answered a question, Steve applauded like a proud father watching his son succeed. But the moment that defined everything came during Fast Money. Marcus's grandmother Dorothy had just finished her turn, scoring a respectable 28 points. Marcus needed 72 more points to win the $20,000 that could change everything for his family. Steve walked Marcus to the center of the stage, his hand on the teenager's shoulder. "You ready for this, son?" Marcus nodded, the oversized jacket making him look even younger, but somehow also more determined. "I'm ready, Mr. Steve." "All right then, let's bring your mama home that medicine money." The Fast Money round began with its familiar intensity, but something was different. Steve's questions seemed gentler, his encouragement more paternal. When Marcus gave good answers, Steve's celebrations were genuine. When the answers were close but not quite right, Steve found ways to make them work. "Name something people do when they're worried," Steve asked. "Pray," Marcus answered immediately. Good answer, survey says. The board revealed. "Name something that cost too much," Steve continued. Marcus's voice was steady. "Medicine." The studio erupted before the survey results were even revealed. 38. Name something kids want to grow up to be. Doctors, Marcus said, so they can help people like my mama. 29 points. The audience was on their feet. Name something that makes you feel better when you're sad. Family, Marcus said without hesitation. 45 points. They needed just 8 more. Name something people save money for. Marcus smiled through his tears, looking directly at Steve. The future. The board revealed 24 points, but it didn't matter. They had won. The Williams family had secured the $20,000 that would change everything. But as the confetti fell and the music played, Steve called for quiet one more time. Before we celebrate, he announced, I want to make an announcement. The studio fell silent. The show is going to match the prize money, Steve declared. The Williams family is going home with $40,000. But more than that, we're setting up a medical assistance fund to help other families facing the same struggles. Because Marcus taught us something tonight about what really matters. The final applause wasn't television applause at all. It was the sound of recognition, of shared humanity, of people understanding that everyone has a burden like Marcus's. Everyone has someone they would sacrifice everything to protect. 6 months later, when the episode aired, it became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of drama or conflict, but because millions of viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. The episode sparked conversations about healthcare costs, family responsibility, and what society owes its most vulnerable members. Angela Williams recovered fully, her medical bills covered by the prize money, and the additional assistance that poured in after the episode aired. Marcus returned to being a 16-year-old boy, focused on school and friends and the normal concerns of adolescence. But he kept Steve's business card framed in his room, a reminder that sometimes strangers become family when you need them most. Steve Harvey kept his promise in ways that extended far beyond that initial gesture. The medical assistance fund that was established in the Williams family's name has helped hundreds of families navigate similar crises. Marcus received a college scholarship and is now studying to become a doctor, determined to help other families avoid the choices his own family once faced. The jacket hangs in Marcus's bedroom now, carefully preserved. On the hardest days, when the memory of that klugel threatens to overwhelm him, he looks at it and remembers that he's not alone, that family extends beyond blood, and that sometimes the most important battles are won, not through individual strength, but through the collective power of people who choose to care. Steve Harvey has said in numerous interviews that Marcus's episode changed him fundamentally as a host and as a person. I realized that day that television isn't just about entertainment, he explained. It's about connection. It's about using whatever platform you have to remind people that we're all in this together, that love and compassion are more powerful than any game or prize. Today, Marcus Williams is a pre-med student at Michigan State University, his education funded by scholarships established in his family's honor. His mother, Angela, is healthy and working as a patient advocate at the same hospital where she once cleaned floors. She helps families navigate the complex world of medical insurance and assistance programs, ensuring that no child has to choose between being a kid and being a caretaker. The Williams family still gathers to watch Family Feud together, but now they watch as part of an extended television family that includes the Chens, who have become close friends, and Steve Harvey himself, who calls on birthdays and holidays to check in on the boy who taught him that real strength sometimes comes in packages too young and too small to carry the weight they're asked to bear. And in television studios around the world, when producers talk about the power of authentic storytelling, when they discuss the difference between entertainment and impact, they tell the story of Marcus Williams, the 16-year-old boy who answered a simple question about allowance money and reminded everyone watching that love doesn't just happen in end gestures. Sometimes it happens in jars full of coins, saved penny by a child who understands that family means being willing to give everything you have for the people who need you most.